We have with us today Deacon Melvin McDaniels. He's a retired Lieutenant Colonel of the United States Army. And we asked him to come in today and just give us a brief overview of our Veterans Tribute that we're going to do today. Deacon McDaniels, we'll turn it over to you.
Today, we try to think about all of the veterans and all of the services and all of the conflicts. Now, you will find as we talk to the veterans today, they will come from just about every conflict that we've had, with the exception of the World War II veterans. And as you know, most of them are getting a little older, but there are some around, and next year we would try to honor some of the World War II veterans. But as the veterans talk to you today, this is going to give you a better understanding of what it was like for them being away from home and being confronted by an enemy that they knew nothing about for the most part. Now, as we go through this today, we want you to keep in mind that these veterans, while they were soldiers, they were also just boys and girls from your neighborhood who used to go to the school with your children. So just think about them that way, and you will have a better understanding of the things that they went through.
We thank you, Deacon McDaniels, and we'll turn it over to the interview at this time.
In Korea, United Nations troops push on in the cautious advance against the communists. An advance whose purpose, General Ridgway states, is not to seize ground, but to wipe out the enemy. The Chinese Red Army, fighting desperately in small isolated stands, prefers to give ground on wider fronts rather than join battle. And it's up to the infantry to clear out the pockets of die-hard communists. With the enemy falling back to the Han River, United Nations commanders had expected that the Reds would make their stand there. But under a steady, withering barrage, GIs are able to cross the river and establish a beachhead. Within 2 hours, a pontoon bridge spans the Han, and United Nations troops and equipment pour across toward the capital city of Seoul. Moments later, Chinese communists, prisoners, are being marched to the rear. Seoul, too, falls into United Nations hands, this time not as a prime military target, but as the result of the clean United Nations sweep up the Korean peninsula. The once proud capital of the Korean Republic is a mass of ruins whose able-bodied men have been carried off to forced service in North Korea. Children and the aged are left to see the liberation of their city. Above Seoul, mud and the Marines take over. For once, the Marines almost meet their match as spring thaws slow down the United Nations push. The Marines came back into action only recently from the Hungnam beachhead. Despite obstacles, United Nations forces drive on to the 38th parallel, border of North Korea.
Okay, we're here at the home of one of Poplar Springs veterans, and we have a couple questions for you. Could you give us your name, branch of service, and dates that you served?
Louis Richardson, United States Navy, 1950 to 1954.
Good. Were you involved in a conflict or war during your period of service? And if so, what was the name of the conflict or war?
Yes, Korean War.
A Korean War veteran, great. Can you tell us a little bit about your conflict experience?
Well, my conflict experience was twofold. One in 1950 and one in 1951. One in 1950, I was assigned to a small unit similar to the Navy SEALs. We came to Korea in a top secret mission. About six of us. We were accompanied by the South Korean Marines for a destination on land. We continued on, led by the South Korean Marines. At night, found our destination, got our top secret information, and on the way back to the boat, discovered, and the firefight ensued. We made it back to the boat. On the way back to the ship that was further out at sea, we had a couple of ships out there to cover our backs, and they were firing to the enemy on the shore. And one of the ships were blown up, and a couple of hundred men lost their lives. I saw that with my eyes. A traumatic experience. When we made it back to the big ship, we turned over our top secret information to the authorities. In 1951 was my second experience. I was assigned to a battleship, and on the battleship, we were attacked by fighter planes, dive bombers, torpedo planes, and my assignment was to shoot down with the crew with anti-aircraft gun the planes. In the firefight, I got injured from a blast in both my eyes, and I was blinded, taken down below, taken to the sick bay, which is our hospital. And I couldn't see out of my eyes for at least 6 months. My sight resumed, and I was able to see pretty good.
Brother Richardson, that's quite an experience. I noticed you have something in your hands. What is that?
This is a medal that I received with an award from the South Korean government in July, I think it was July 27th, in Greenville, sponsored by the veterans organizations. And the government of South Korea presented some veterans, including me, with this award, which is a statement of my service with my name on it, an award for Korean service, and then a special award, Ambassador for Peace. And this award I would like to dedicate to the brave men and women, not only in the Korean War, but in the Afghanistan War and in the Vietnam War, because the Korean War and those other two wars are the forgotten wars. And we didn't get much credit and no recognition, and I appreciate recognition given by this church and recognition given by the South Korean government, because we haven't been recognized yet by our government for our services in the forgotten wars. And I want to dedicate this medal to those that fought in all those 3 wars.
Brother Richardson, as a fellow veteran myself, the Vietnam conflict, I thank you for that dedication, and we appreciate your sacrifice for our country. And we're so sorry that you didn't get the recognition at that time, but we're so thankful that we were able to recognize you today. And we thank you so much for your service, and we'll end this interview at this time.
Here's the KTFS 2020 News for people with vision.
Artillery from the communist side has been pounding American positions south of the demilitarized zone between the two Vietnams. The firing that continued throughout the South Vietnamese voting killed 8 U.S. Marines and wounded 20.
The conflict in Vietnam, spurred on by the Gulf of Tonkin incident, is on its way to becoming a full-scale war. Small numbers of advisors become tens of thousands of fighting men as the nation continues to expand its involvement in a war few Americans understand. The U.S. intends to remain in Vietnam just long enough for the South Vietnamese government to organize and train its own military forces to stand under its own power. But as tensions mount, President Lyndon B. Johnson and his administration struggle to find the right level of involvement, hoping to contain the communist threat coming down from North Vietnam. As soldiers make landfall, 1965 is the year the Vietnam War truly begins. November 14th, 1965. The first major conflict between the U.S. Army and the North Vietnamese will happen along the Drang River and be known as the Battle of Ia Drang. Most importantly, it will be a harsh lesson in the unforgiving terrain of Vietnam. The newly formed...
We're here at the home of one of our veterans from Poplar Spring Missionary Baptist Church, and we're here to ask him a few questions about his service. Could you give us your name, branch of service, and dates that you served?
My name is James Beal. I served in the United States Army from October 66 to October 68.
Were you involved in a conflict or war during your period of service? And if so, what was the name of that conflict?
I was involved in the Vietnam conflict, and during that time we did I was part of some operations over there, Operation Santa Fe, and Operation Junction City and Attleboro.
And what was the dates of your stay in Vietnam or visit in Vietnam?
My dates, I was over there. I was in Vietnam from February of 67 to March 68.
And again, so you were there during the Tet Offensive.
I was there during the Tet Offensive. That was, matter of fact, a birthday gift for me because the Tet Offensive started one day before my birthday.
Wow, what a remember. Did the conflict change you in any way? If so, how?
The conflict, if you ever been to war, in real war, anybody who's been, let's say it didn't change them, is not really telling the truth, because the conflict changes everybody to some degree. And it also changed me, and I brought back a few scars with that change. In other words, I came back with post-traumatic stress and a few other things, you know.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you for your service to our country, and we appreciate your dedication and sacrifice. Again, we realize that the Vietnam returnees didn't get the appreciation or the celebration that they deserved, but we want to do our part at Poplar Springs to recognize you at this time. We thank you.
Thank you.
And this concludes our interview.
Thank you.
Deacon McDaniels is now going to give us some of his experiences while he was in the military. Deacon McDaniels, were you involved in a conflict during your period of service?
Yes, I was. The major conflict I was involved in was the Vietnam conflict. But many people forget about the conflict in the Dominican Republic back in the mid-60s. I was involved in that activity also, although it did not last very long.
Well, can you tell us if the conflict changed you in any way, and if so, how?
Well, yes, it did. But one thing that I knew when I got the orders that I was going to be going to Vietnam, I knew that if anybody was going to come back alive, it was going to be me. So, because I was going to do those things I was supposed to do to make sure I was coming back alive. Plus, I had the prayers of my church, and my family, and my friends. And I also had the prayers of the sisters at Our Lady of the Seneca mission in New Orleans. Although I was a Baptist, they gave me a going off and told me that they were going to be praying for me. And I'm sure they did.
I want to thank you for your service, Deacon McDaniels. And we truly appreciate your dedication and sacrifice. And at this time, we'll end this interview. at Poplar Spring Missionary Baptist Church with our Sunday school superintendent, who's also a veteran. Could you give us your name, branch of service, and dates that you served?
Yes, my name is Robert Watkins Jr., and I enlisted in the service in July of 1970, and I was honorably discharged in July of 1974 after 4 years. Also, I spent some time in the South Carolina Air National Guard. I joined in September, let's see, let me get this right here. I joined in September 1987, and I served until July 2009.
You know, that's a 13-year gap, and I can only speak for me, but not everybody could get out of service that long and then go back in and be as successful as you were. Were you involved in a conflict or war during your period of service? And if so, what was the name of that conflict?
Yes, I was involved in the Gulf War, also known as Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Can you tell us a little bit about your conflict experience?
Yes, my conflict experience involved once I got in theater. Because we got in theater in January before we actually started the war. We was there from day one. And most of it, I can remember the night we sent the planes off on the first bombing mission. And it was something like a 6-hour flight to the site until they had bombers. They had air tankers up there waiting on them so they can make that 6 hours and come back. And in the meantime, we stayed on the ground. We said a lot of prayers, and it was just a lot of solid, during that time.
Anyone that's been in conflict, I'm sure, said some prayers whether they were a believer or not, because it's a kind of frightening experience. Did the conflict or war change you in any way? If so, how?
Okay, let me tell you about one experience that I had. A Scud missile was coming in. I was in bed that night, the alarm went off when we got up, and we had to don our gear and go get, a bomb dump. And during that night, it was real nervous, because like I said, when we put on our gear, a lot of time when we practice, we didn't take it too serious though. But that night, we took it real serious. We were helping one another to make sure that we had everything on properly, and we got in the dump and took cover. And that was really interesting that night.
Well, we want to thank you for your service to our country. We appreciate your dedication in service. And on behalf of Poplar Spring, we applaud you, and we thank you for everything that you did in the service of our country. This ends the interview. Cool. We have with us here today one of our trustees from Poplar Spring Missionary Baptist Church, who is also a veteran. Could you give us your name, branch of service, and dates that you served?
Pamela Mahoney, United States Air Force, October 14, 1986 through 1 November 2010, retired, age 7.
Well, were you ever in a war zone or anything of that nature during your period of service?
Yes, I've been in the war zones.
Okay, where were you stationed? And can you give us a little bit about your experience there?
My experience there was to actually get them supplies in any means necessary. I was a supply logistic person for 24 years. I enjoyed my job. I still enjoy it.
And what war zone were you involved in?
Saudi Arabia.
Okay, good. Saudi Arabia. And that was during which, I know they have Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Was that during that period of time?
It was right after Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Okay. Well, good. Well, Sister Mahoney, we thank you for your service to our country, and we really appreciate your dedication and sacrifice. And the members and friends of Poplar Spring Missionary Baptist Church are so proud of you. And with that, we're going to end our interview.
Thank you.
Hello, Poplar Spring Baptist Church. I am Senior Master Sergeant Tyrone Yergin, and I have served in the United States Air Force for over 20 years. Throughout my 20-year career, I have served in many operations throughout the world. Some of these operations you might know, such as Iraqi Freedom, which was a conflict between the United States and Iraq from 2003 to 2011, and also Operation Enduring Freedom, which was the war in Afghanistan. During these conflicts, I served in many roles, while in the military. Some of these roles were air advisor, helping our host nation counterparts establish their military strength, convoy commanders for when convoys were going off the installation to different locations throughout the AOR. Also, I was a personal security attachment lead for our commanding officer at the time. I also held numerous other roles while deployed during these conflicts. One of the most important things that I'll say I take away from being deployed was always being prepared. A good day can turn into a bad day in an instant. Being off base, you think everything is good, and before you know it, it's chaos. So I always preach from the lowest ranking airman to the highest ranking individual that was with us to always be prepared. I always told everybody that you want to come home to your loved ones and be safe and be able to talk about your experience that you had over there. I have also traveled the world doing other operations. I can say that I've been to many countries such as Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, all over South America, Central America, and throughout Europe. From my deployments and travel, I can say one of the biggest things that I learned is experience of the culture throughout the world. It opened my eyes to see that the world is very different from just the United States. In closing, I would like to thank Poplar Spain Baptist Church for the 20 years of saying prayers and being in my corner. Thank you for keeping me in your prayers and thoughts, and hopefully I will see you soon. God bless and take care.
I would like to thank all current and former members of the military. Our country's greatness is built on the foundation of your courage and sacrifice, and we thank you. Not only should we thank the military on Veterans Day, we should thank them throughout the year for the vital service they perform for our country. Veterans have to leave their home and family, having no control over where they're sent, and at times living in unclean conditions. Veterans chose to endure it all in efforts to contribute to this country's freedom. There are veterans that left home knowing they were making a sacrifice when they chose to serve, and these individuals ended up making the ultimate sacrifice in their line of duty. They gave their life to defend this land that we live in, and their families will always remember that. So to all current and former members of the military, we thank you for your service.